Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in and spending a little bit of time with us. On behalf of the Very Reverend Judy Sullivan, the Dean of the Philadelphia Episcopal Cathedral, and Dr. Aaron Cross, the Director of Penn's LGBT Center, and Dr. Brian Peterson, the Director of Penn's Makuu Black Cultural Center, and all the good folks on their staff. Thank you for joining us for this conversation in response to the recent release of the documentary, My Name is Pauli Murray. If you have not seen it, I commend it to you. It is powerful, it is educational, it is worshipful, it is pastoral, it is healing, it is hopeful, it is painful, and it's special. I really do hope that you get a chance to see it. And I'm really excited that we get to have a conversation about the documentary, more importantly, about a wonderful soul with three friends who I've known for different time periods, but who I deeply admire each. Very briefly, by way of introduction, our first guest is the Director of Faith-Based and Interfaith Affairs, but you are internationally known here in the city of Philadelphia, and also professor at Villanova University, Reverend Naomi Washington-Leaphart. It is good to see you, my old inspiration friend. I will not ask you to sing on this Zoom, but I want everybody to know that she can sing, by the way.
Thank you, Reverend Chaz.
Also wonderful and excited to welcome the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer and former Director of LGBTQ Affairs in the Mayor's Office, Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer of the ACLU, here in Philadelphia, Amber Hikes. It was great to see you in service yesterday, and it is wonderful to see you here today as well. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor.
I also saw in service yesterday my good friend, Pauli Reese, producer, artist, vocalist, gifted musician as well. We have like a little choir here on this, on our Zoom, a street chaplain, and staff at the Philadelphia Episcopal Cathedral, en route to ordination in the Episcopal Church. Pauli, it is wonderful to have you here as well. Thank you for the help in the tech before we started recording. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chaz. Thanks for having me.
Just want to jump right in to, if it's okay. First with you, my dear friend Naomi. When did you first hear of Pauli Murray?
So I heard about Pauli in my quest to find myself, see myself in Christian ministry. I was in seminary, training for ministry. I didn't have any sense of what that would concretely look like. I was a super church member already. I knew all the things apparently I needed to know about devotion and loyalty to one's religious community. But I had very few models for what walking this out truly looked like. I also came out in seminary, which I'm not sure I recommend that, but I came out in seminary. There was something about, there was a connection between spiritual depth and searching and clarity about my own self. So it makes a lot of sense to me that I came out in seminary, so it was even more important to me then to find Black out queer folk who had also said yes to the call to Christian ministry and found a way to serve unapologetically. And so I encountered Pauli in my research and, read everything I could, gobbled up all the things, bought a little icon that was created by another Pauli disciple, and kind of kept Pauli to myself. I mean, nobody else was talking about Pauli, so I was like, well, this will be my gift to myself. And then, of course, when I was the faith director for the National LGBTQ Task Force and in a position to speak publicly and openly about queerness and faith at the same time, I wanted to introduce Pauli to that constituency. And so we had an event. I don't even know what the event was, but I had remarks. And my remarks were basically, let me tell you about the most important person you probably have never heard of, this queer person of faith. And so shared the gift that was that was so personal and powerful to me with my colleagues and friends at the task force, and have been talking about Pauli ever since then.
Most important person you probably never heard of. Mm. Pauli and Amber, may I ask you the same in that order, please? When's the first time you heard of, how did you hear of Pauli Murray?
Well, I was actually resident at Yale in seminary when Pauli Murray's residential college was dedicated back in 2018. There was this energy around that. In addition, because at the time there was a major reckoning of racial identity, of sexual attraction identities, and gender identity and expression, not just on the campus at large, but in the seminary, in the divinity school. There were an increasing number of students who were making choices not to participate in what I would label as a don't ask, don't tell culture around gender identity, and a general discomfort with all of the generations of white privilege and supremacy and white money that fuels Yale, and the backs of folks of color, particularly Black folks whose sweat equity and whose lives were poured into producing Yale. When I heard about them, not just in the dedication of the college, but then also in an internship where I was in a place in the middle of nowhere in California, where I happened upon an Episcopal church where there happened to be an icon of Pauli. All of these coincidences, which I prefer to think of as leadings of the Spirit, plus my birth, first name and middle initial pronounces phonetically to Pauli's name, it became something where I decided this is the saint of the Episcopal Church that I want to know, whose life I would like to look to as an inspiration. And being a person who's seeking ordination, and there being a lot of questions about trans and non-binary identity in our church now, Pauli seems to me a person who I can look at and say, well, if there's a place for Pauli to be serving in priestly or ordained sacramental ministry, maybe there just might be a place for me too. And it does also so happen, Rev Naomi, that all of these things caused me to come out in seminary as well. To think of this very unsafe place as a safe place to come out.
Thank you, Pauli. The profundity of renaming Old Calhoun College House to Pauli Murray College House, something that I think would be stunning to both of them, but how meaningful it is to reckon with painful histories and try to make it right in inspiring ways. You know, I come from Penn, I can't give Yale too much love. On the other hand, I can celebrate this, that Yale, the Penn of Connecticut, did a good job making this, changing the name there. So thank you for that. Amber, please.
I love this, Yale, the Penn of Connecticut. I think that's going to catch on. You're starting some messes very early here, Chaz. So I'll say that my experiences and understanding, I should think about this before I say it. No, I feel like this is accurate. My experience and understanding of Pauli Murray has evolved over the years as I've grown and evolved. And so in many ways, it feels like Pauli has grown and expanded and evolved with me. And so that feels like a strange kind of strong declaration, but I can explain why. So I think I have a somewhat kind of rare experience. And I was introduced to Pauli Murray when I was a very young person. And that was because, so as a young person that was growing up in the South, and my mom was at Spelman College at that time. We were right in Atlanta. And I grew up with, I don't want to say that it was hammered into me, but we were constantly talking about civil rights history, the experience of Black folks in the South now and then. And it was really important to my mother that my sister and I understood where we came from. So we understood what was required of us for where we are going. And by us, I mean community, right? She talks very much about community and family and really standing on the shoulders of giants and there being like a responsibility for us. So that kind of service, specifically within a civil rights and human rights context, was something that was really important. And so I mentioned that because my mom also did this from a feminist lens. She was a single mom and really leaned into, this is what women have done, right? And these stories are often not heard, but you need to know this so that you know what's possible for you and what work you also have to do. And so I think it was, it was pretty rare. I think it's rare for folks, but I was exposed to Pauli Murray when I was under the age of 10. And I think there's some reasons for that. So one, we were in the South and we have this civil rights context, but also my entire family were Episcopalians. We're cradle Episcopalians. I've only been an Episcopalian my whole life. Same for my mother, same for her mother as well. And so it was important to say, there's this person, this woman, this AFAB person who also has this experience. And then to add on top of that, the legal background was really important. My mother wanted deeply for me to be a lawyer. And so she wanted to she never missed an opportunity to show that Pauli Murray was a lawyer. And this is like the power that you could have if you pursued a legal degree. And so I understood very much like the part that Pauli played in civil rights and the rights of women. Later in undergrad is where I dug more into the sexual orientation, the gender identity pieces for Pauli. That was something that my mother was not open and candid about. And I have a lot of critiques for that, but there was not a spotlight on that, on Pauli Murray as a queer person. And I think that would have been so helpful to me to be able to even more fully see myself when I was younger. But that is something that evolved with me as I understood myself better later. And then I'll say, of course, like now being at the ACLU, right? And being with folks who are very literally carrying forth the legacy of Pauli Murray, and even talking to board members who served on the board with Pauli Murray is just astounding. And so the more I learn about Pauli Murray, the more I learn about myself as a Black, queer, non-binary AFAB person who was also Episcopalian and grew up in the South and works at the ACLU. I feel like Pauli's life and legacy reminds me every single day about what's possible. And Naomi mentioned models, like modeling, and I think that's so real. What all the careers, right, to your point, Naomi, that Pauli accomplished are just such incredible models for us to be able to live authentically and extensively, expansively as ourselves.
Pauli Murray as inspiration and as challenger and convictor in a lot of ways about what we could and should be doing in some sense as well. Thank you all for each blessing us with the part of your contact with this saint. Thank you for that. Naomi, you're surrounded by Episcopalians. I apologize. We don't know if we realized that when we were setting up the panel. So.
Who knew? Well, I'm ecumenical in practice, and so
Hallelujah.
yes.
Hallelujah. So I was watching the documentary earlier this week, and my 2 teenagers came in the room and asked what y'all watching, because they wanted the TV to watch some bad TV, something that they went and I tried to describe who Pauli Murray was quick enough so I can get back to it. I didn't want them to really stay with my explanation. I wanted to watch it. They didn't, documentary, they're not into that. They kind of want to see something else. If you all had to talk to teenagers, very briefly, succinctly, how would you describe Pauli Murray? Amber, could you get us started with that?
Oh, gladly, because I was so worried somebody was going to take my my adjectives. If I was telling teenagers, revolutionary is the first thing that comes to mind. Pauli Murray was so far beyond their time. And I'll go back and forth between she and they pronouns. I think the Pauli Murray Foundation has recently said that they'll be using she and they pronouns for Pauli moving forward. So I'll do that here as well. Revolutionary. And by that, I mean before their time, I also mean transformational, right? So Pauli, it helped to ignite revolutions. I mean that as well. Gender expansive, just beyond brilliant, like the analysis, right? The analysis, just so extraordinary. I think that Pauli Murray is a figure that would be so relatable for young folks, especially this generation of young folks who are leading us, who are frankly saying the things that Pauli was saying decades ago. I think that there is something that is not just inspiring, but very relatable about the way that they live their life and the way that they are calling more, they're requiring more of all of us. Yes, so I would say revolutionary and transformational, gender expansive, brilliant.
So, I'm going to use language to describe Pauli that also challenges me. Like, this is the part of Pauli that I'm like, I'm trying to follow your lead and I don't have what it takes. I think that Pauli, to me, mastered the discipline of hope, like hope as a discipline, not hope as like connected to immediate outcomes or connected to this kind of shallow optimism, but when we assess Pauli's work in all of these different careers, I think that work was connected to her sense of it's possible to be better than this. It's possible to have the world we dream of. It's possible. And so whether it was through direct action or through the legal, through jurisprudence or through ministry, I think Pauli was working out this commitment to hope. So she was a hope dealer. I mean, to use that kind of terminology. And a hope kind of cultivator. I mean, and I think this is a skill. This is a skill developed by discipline, right? And then I think I would also say that Pauli was striving to live a fully integrated life where you would not, their work was their passion, was their sense of divine call, was, and they tried to pour the features of their interior life into this exterior work, this external work. And it makes me a little sad because we know that, and this will be part of our conversation too. We know that there were obstacles that they faced to live that fully integrated life, or as fully integrated as possible. But I think that on the whole, what Pauli was trying to do was make the inside match the outside and the outside match the inside. And that, you know, I would say to young people, that's goals, that's hashtag goals, right? To not be living a double life in any way. And just sadly, what we know is that the world often won't let us do that for whatever the reasons are. But I would describe her in those two ways.
Building on what Rev Naomi has said, the word activator comes to mind. Pauli strikes me as the person who would think to themselves, this is something that needs done, regardless of what it was, whether it's taking the trash out or I think it was said somewhere, I don't know that it's actually in the documentary, but they write about it in their autobiography that a person plus a typewriter constitutes a social movement. Was a quote that resonates with me. They made me want a typewriter so badly because of the tag. Like I learned to type on a typewriter, not a proper mechanical one, but an electric one, and that pastiche is both nostalgic and immediately appealing, which I suppose shows my true colors as a millennial. To return to days of yore that are largely unrecoverable. But I'll say also, I would say from the sort of Christian Episcopal spirituality side, since we talk a lot about liturgy and the way that we do things, I would say that the life of Pauli represents the ultimate liturgist, because that word comes from the Greek liturgia, meaning the work of the people. Pauli recognized that this work is not just her own work, but the work is certainly something that needs to be done, and needs to be done regularly and with intention, where there needs to be room for failure to be involved, but that failure constitutes an opportunity for growth and refinement, as we learned over so many of the disappointments and tragedies that they experienced over life. And then I would say the third word that comes to mind is tenacity. The tenaciousness that Pauli exudes over the doc, the written works, the new poetry volume, Dark Testament, that came out also in 2018. Like I can hardly think of a pillar of church or law or civil rights that I've studied, and admittedly my studies are small, that exhibits more tenacity than Pauli.
I appreciate the three of you and your responses there. You know, I tried to describe them to my kids around an amazing life, one who lived an amazing life, a brilliant life, a life of genius, and in that very rare category of individuals that to me includes Paul Robeson, Ben Franklin, Da Vinci, that sort of that genius that is, as Duke Ellington would say, beyond category, literally beyond category of, if you can't say one vocation that Pauli had, priest, attorney, professor, poet, scholar, activist, writer, and much more than that, advisor, mentor, lover, child, grandchild, but was excellent in each of those categories in the way that, my favorite American's Paul Robeson, in the way that Paul Robeson in a lot of ways was excellent in a whole lot of categories. And I think the kind of cliche people have been saying about Pauli Murray is like before their time. And it's interesting, it'd be an interesting question I was thinking about too, is like, what is, if Pauli Murray is peaking vocationally in 2021, is Pauli Murray a lot more famous? Is Pauli Murray, a bishop in the Episcopal Church, a Supreme Court justice, a professor at some, whatever university, tons of books? Does Pauli Murray not kind of get sort of in the background of Thurgood, in the background of Ruth Bader Ginsburg? Is Pauli Murray like leading those campaigns if they're born 20 years later? So kind of before their time, in a sense, was one thing that I also tried to articulate as the film was on. Speaking of the film, Pauli, can we turn back to you here? And then we'll ask everybody, what were your thoughts of My Name is Pauli Murray, this film documentary? You, particularly as an artist, as a content creator yourself, what did you think about it? And I'm curious, everyone, not only what did you think about its production, but what did you feel watching it?
Production-wise, it hits a lot of sweet spots for me personally in terms of learning style. There is most certainly a narrative arc to the documentary in looking at the different interviews, the bits of personal interview from Pauli that are particularly effective. There are certainly the production values are very high, but in particular, I have a very big struggle with reading for long periods of time. I'm a very fidgety person, so they did a very respectable job of condensing maybe 4 or 5 monographs plus, I'd say, a dozen or so academic papers, plus I'm sure what must be hundreds of hours of interview into a 2-hour piece that is, I would say, is very it not only honors all of that content, but it heightens it. It seizes on the moment of streaming. It uses the tools that are readily available, which is a thing I think that Pauli would have appreciated themselves, to make strategic and intelligent use of resources. But it is deeply gripping, and I would say on a level of personal spirituality, it feels devotional in a way that few resources are, whether they are intended to be explicitly spiritual or not.
I'm so grateful to Pauli for kicking us off there, because the first reflection that I have is this is a Herculean task. This person's lives, right? So many lives. It is a deeply ambitious task to say that we're going to be able to, in any way, kind of summarize or do our due diligence here, right, in a respectful way to the expansiveness of this person's life in 2 hours. But I think it was extraordinarily well done. I will say it leaves you wanting more, right? Wanting so much more. I feel like in every aspect of the documentary, it leaves you saying, oh no, I'd like to know more about these letters with the Roosevelts. I want to know more about the architecture behind Brown v. Board, right? I really, if there's any critique that I have, it's that we grazed over the piece, right? The piece at the end, towards the end of her life, around her being ordained, right? And what that journey looked like. Which there is so much when you talk about the autobiographies, there's so much in the memoir about what that experience was like. And I think there's the second critique I have is we could have done so much more around gender identity and also I think around the queerness around sexual orientation. And I think there was like a discomfort that I felt in the way they were trying to tell that story. And it's understandable, because for so long and so often, those aspects of Pauli's life have been glazed over. And so I felt like this documentary was saying, we're going to do this, right? We're going to do this the best that we can with what we have. But I wanted more there. But I saw that same kind of discomfort with the sexual orientation and gender identity conversations. I saw that when we were talking about religion as well, right? I remember there's like a Ginsburg piece, like, I don't know what the heck Pauli was doing with this. And it's challenging because Pauli tells you what Pauli was doing with religion. Pauli talks about this calling being a calling that was there for their entire life. And finally, after this passing of this loved one, it's like, I cannot deny this any longer. I am in my early 60s, and still this is a calling that I have to pursue. And she talks openly about how there she'd been on this journey for her entire life and just hadn't really quite recognized that's what it was. So I think it was extraordinarily well done. It definitely left me wanting so much more, and perhaps that's exactly the point.
You know, the thing that I relished most was hearing Pauli's voice. I think I had worked out whatever in my imagination about, you know, Pauli's personality and this helped me fill in some of those blanks about, you know, what Pauli's voice sounds like and you know, Pauli's mannerisms, and like I was really drawn to that. And you know, I agree that the treatment of her personal life was, it was there because I came away with such a sadness about it. But they didn't go, I don't think they went so far as to sort of name the tragedy of the loneliness and the you know, confusion and dissonance, and you know, so I agree that we need a part two. We need a deeper dive. I also was struck by what should I say? I guess this is related to hearing Pauli's voice. The images that we saw for the first time, you know, I hadn't seen, you know, the images of Pauli and the dog, or Paul, you know, I hadn't seen those. And so again, the care with which I can tell the filmmakers explored Pauli's papers and material. I mean, you know, there's a way to research someone and with a callousness or with a lack of care. And then there's thoughtful respect for a life well lived. And that came across in the film. I feel like they took care of Pauli. And Pauli's work and Pauli's legacy. And I don't take that for granted, because I think we've seen some biopics that don't seem to care about the person whose story they're telling, right? So I appreciated that about the film. I don't know a lot about filmmaking and the technical aspects but I could feel the care, and I appreciated that.
I agree with everything y'all said totally. You know, it's one thing to read about someone. It's even another thing to read their words. It is profound to sort of hear them particularly someone from the past. And I love sort of seeing people's quirks and low personalities. So like the very opening interview, they almost seem bothered by like, I'm trying to do something here, and like, what's the question? And the dog's barking. Be quiet, sit down. Like just like very, very human part of a saint, which is really, really neat to see. You alluded to this, all of you. There's also a deep sadness. There's a brilliance and a passion and a joy, but there's a heaviness. I was sort of writing in my journal about the pain of the kind of unrequited love right after college, and the deep heartbreak. And the filmmakers alluded to this kind of a sinking and kind of a tailspin after that. The kind of deep grief of the loss of Irene, I think, sort of we read as kind of the love of their life, and real pain in saying goodbye there. The kind of correspondence with the doctors around gender identity that, again, I think is a grand total of maybe 2 or 3 minutes in the film. And there's probably a lot that's lost to history. You also get the impression that Pauli Murray was a deeply private person, and it's hard to not kind of encroach upon someone's private business. A lot of this is a product of one's time, that conversations around sexuality and gender identity were very, very different 20 years ago, let alone 50, 60 years ago. But you almost did feel like we have all these boxes. There's a lot more we could say from their journals, from here's a little bit. So I had the same feeling of like, I really want to hear more. I also feel like this is grown folk business, and unless we've been personally invited in, I don't want to push too hard, but I kind of need to hear more. And that kind of, maybe that is the brilliance of filmmaking, kind of leaving you curious to kind of go do a little bit more, or maybe they're just trying to respect somebody's private. It's complicated there, right? Well, one question I would ask you all: if you could ask Pauli Murray anything, if you had a one-on-one with Pauli Murray, who closed the door and said, like, I am a private person, but I like you, and I consider you a friend, Pauli, Amber, Naomi. I'm an open book. You can ask me anything. What would you ask them? And then the bonus is, what do you think they would say? Naomi, can I come back to you?
Yeah. As a person who is animated mostly by anger, like my fires are, I did Reiki once and I was like, the person was like, oh, so apparently I'm on fire. There is literal fire shut up in my bones, to use the religious, the religious language. I want to know, Pauli, I imagine that see, I can't, some stuff pissed you off to be the architect of so much and not get cited. I mean, maybe they didn't want to, you don't call my name, but just cite me. The loneliness, the frustration of not being able to put words to what Pauli knew was going on with her inside, and to be asking doctor after doctor and and the loneliness. What did you do with the rage is the question I would ask. Where did you put it? How did you transform it? This is from a person whose fire will burn you up as well. And so again, looking for models. How do I live without being consumed by the fires that animate me, right? And that animate my work. So that's the question I would ask. What Pauli would say, maybe Pauli was like, child, you got to let stuff go. I mean, maybe that's would be like, you can't hold on to that, because it strikes me that, if Pauli was carrying around this rage, I don't know that Pauli would have been able to, let me segue from civil rights and direct action and to legal jurisprudence and segue to, again, driven by what to me is a discipline of hope, right? So I think maybe Pauli would be like, child, you got to go break some plates and then move on. So that's what I'm asking.
I second that motion. I don't know what else to say. In my own experience, particularly, well, I suppose I can say Yale, and also having had some experience at the seminary where she went, General Theological Seminary, and then thinking about now the process of ordination and the weird politics of identity that comes with being Episcopalian, also being queer, also being a person of color in a church, and having experiences in that church in overwhelmingly white sectors of that church, white geographical regions of that church. I find myself asking a lot of times, how do you turn that fury, how do you turn that loss, that depression? I'm sure there's anxiety, so Pauli has the mental health trifecta, but how do you turn all of that into energy, probably prayers, I would assume, into little things that turn the injustice you see into action? What are the sorts of things that you did to keep yourself from burning up in rage? Yeah.
I'm going to continue in this vein because I think we're in similar places here. So I will third that emotion and that motion. So mine is around this rage piece that you all are talking about. But here's what I'm reflecting on. I'm so grateful that she wrote so much and that we have interviews, right? We have text from her, but there's just so much that we still don't know. And that's, when I think about it, that's the insidiousness of erasure, and erasure that's rooted in racism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia, right? But in her own words, I'd like to know, what are the aspects of your legacy that you wish we knew, that you wish we could tell? Like, essentially, what are we missing in your own words? And there's so much power for Pauli themselves to be able to say, if you're asking, and again, we're in this time, right? We're in 2021, which is the context that I think is particularly helpful. What is it that you want us to know about what you've done, what you've seen, what you've dreamed? And how can we tell that, right? To go back to the idea of the model that Pauli creates for us. That's one question. If I could sneak in a second one, it'll just be purely selfish from the context of the ACLU, because we are seeing unprecedented attacks on voting rights, on reproductive freedom, on our trans and non-binary communities. We are seeing also unparalleled opportunities for progress with racial justice, with our criminal legal work, right? And so from a selfish perspective, I want to say, homie, we need your help. We need that brilliant legal mind to help us be able to fight this on the ground. And needs to say nothing of what the Supreme Court looks like right now, right? We just do not have a favorable court. So I think there's another question I would sneak in there from the architect of Brown v. Board to say, what else you got for these times? Because we need another brilliant legal mind, as many as we can get in the room for today's challenges. And I have no idea what the heck they would say, to be honest, no clue.
Trying to get that pro bono legal counsel there. That's free. Y'all are such a brilliant circle here. I think in your wisdom, in your sharpness, I think the three of you reflect Pauli Murray in so many ways, in different ways. Each of you have sort of carried her legacy on, and I like to think that they'd be very proud of you, and for the different paths that you're walking. And so I think that just to kind of land it, and as we begin to wrap up our time, Pauli Murray passes away, transitions in 1985, I believe. How have things changed? If they have at all, and again, in answering that in the context of the various spaces that Pauli Murray blessed, clearly legal, direct action and activism. I think things have changed from the kind of hot typewriter takes to maybe people are like tweeting at the president now instead of around our national, global, intra-national conversations around sexuality, around gender identity, around race. Clearly, there's been change around like college house names and things like that, and certainly an awareness of who Pauli Murray was and is. But if Pauli Murray came back and said, "Update me," well, how have things changed? What would you say? And take whatever corner of life that you'd like to share. How have things changed? Why don't we do Naomi, Amber, then Pauline, in that order?
You know, the cynic, angry person in me is like, ain't nothing changed. I think this notion of, you know, the we can trace this intellectual heritage back to Pauli and perhaps others, and then move it forward and think about Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. You know, we understand now that the dynamics of power are always at play and don't work in the same way, at the same time, at the same pace, depending on which identity power is assaulting. You know, because proving that separate was not equal took the kind of analysis of the way power and really the way oppression works that is I guess sort of common vocabulary today. Like we know that because of the way we've been racialized, one's experience is dependent on and contingent on the way the systems of oppression intersect and interact and cooperate. So I think that maybe Pauli would be pleased that what was so perhaps illegible at the time in terms of the public discourse seems to be at least legible now. You know, and then in terms of the church, I mean, that's really where I was going when I was saying ain't nothing really changed. And we're still fighting about who should be ordained and in 2021, really. You know, but I exist, I'm possible, you know? And that's different from the kind of religious ecosystem that Pauli had to navigate. And so clearly there's something going on such that I squeaked my way in. You know, I got my papers and they can't take my papers away. So, and two or three folk will come and hear me say something, you know, on a random Sunday morning, right? And that is different. And we bless Pauli for helping to pave that way.
Like Naomi, consummate cynic, I was feeling it. There's not enough has changed. Not enough has changed. The conversation is different. It's more nuanced at times, but so much is still the same. And I'm going to demonstrate this point by something I noticed through my second watching of the documentary, and it reminded me that, you know, Pauli was declined from UNC Chapel Hill, if you won't remember this, and then ended up going to Howard. And I said, oh, so like Nicole Hannah-Jones was denied tenure at UNC and then ended up going to Howard. Woo, right? Woo, yeah. It just, you know, sometimes it doesn't have to be that loud and that obvious, right? So not enough, to Reverend Naomi's point, has changed, but we are possible. This conversation is possible. It's being had by so many more of us. The language we have to have this conversation about all these different aspects, all these different forms of oppression, even that Naomi was just talking about. I will even say who's having the conversation. What our allies and accomplices look like is different than what they looked like then. And that allows us to have a different kind of conversation. We're truly standing on Pauli's shoulders. And so in any explanation that I would give Pauli, there would be a profound thank you for the ability to even have access to these resources, this conversation, this language, these allies. But not enough has changed. But thanks to Pauli, we have tremendous progress that we wouldn't have otherwise.
Perennial cynic number 3, reporting for duty. I think about like having very recently finished seminary and recently being drawn back into those worlds for any number of reasons, thinking about the unpleasantness that happened at General Theological Seminary with so many faculty being forced to resign, the fact that Berkeley Divinity School, the Episcopal wing of YDS, hired their first Black, not even academic faculty member, but administrative dean, at the beginning of this past school term, their first female academic faculty person 2 terms ago, I think. I'd be curious to see what they would say about there's the question. There's another question, I guess. I'm looping back to a point that we had before, but like I would ask, like, what should theological higher education look like in this day and age? There's a question I'll add. I think what's changed is that so many of us who are on the business end of systemic oppression have the language to be able to identify how those systems cause us exasperation and trauma in particular, and to be able to say it is our right by virtue of our common humanity that we should not be experiencing these things. And a system that claims to be just and to be so founded in Christian spirituality and doctrine has a moral responsibility, and if we are supposedly a Christian nation, then a legal responsibility to remedy that. I think about some of those systems. I think they would say they would note that I think what's changed is that rooting out a lot of that that oppression, the way that oppression works, requires a finer toothed comb to identify, acknowledge. I think particularly the ample disregard of basic fundamentals of Christian theology, scientific fact, and legal precedent that is currently a part of our culture. I would think they would find absolutely infuriating. And then we'd circle back around to asking that question about how to diffuse the fury again. But I think over anything, we at least, I think we can name, we have more language to name all of the gross miscarriages of justice, sometimes carried out in the name of the very Christianity that Pauli so loved, to be able to say not only this isn't just, but how can we bring restoration? How can we bring healing? And what can we change about ourselves? What can we change about our society? What can we change about the way that we connect with each other so that more people can experience that wholeness, that restoration, that justice that our law promises, that our common humanity promises, and that our faith promises.
Amen. You know, I like to imagine that Pauli would sort of be amazed and frustrated at the same time, as you all alluded to. You know, I think there are individual and some unique examples of breakthrough and progress. And yet, you know, Frederick Douglass wrote about in what new skin will the old snake rear its head. I think there's some similar. I think they'd be stunned that y'all still fighting that, all of you. And I think Pauli be amazed at Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, Bishop Michael Curry, and Catherine Jefferson Uriah. I think be stunned that, you know, look, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's a Supreme Court justice. Like, I thought Thurgood was a big, like, I think there would be some biggies. I think they'd be amazed at what the Episcopal Church looks like in some parts, and deeply frustrated in other parts. I think looking at the roles that y'all play in our city, I think there'd be a bit of a slow clap of, wow, they bad, they doing it. And yet I think a deep grief at the rise of white nationalism and bigotry from the highest land. That y'all still got racist presidents. You know, I think there'd be all of that. I really do appreciate the three of you taking the time to bless us, and the professional people who will be watching this, the students who will be watching this. I also, again, want to thank the Philadelphia Episcopal Cathedral. This really was very much Dean Judy's vision, to have this conversation, to have these screenings. So thank you for leadership that is brave, like Pauli Murray, like Reverend Pauli Murray. And I'm thankful for the way that Penn's LGBT Center and Penn's Makuu Black Culture Center just take care of and love and fight for generations of students. And just grateful for that. And grateful to the three of you all for your brilliance and for your love and your passion and your wisdom and your fire. Thanks everybody for watching. Take care.